Recording. There it went, and it just started. So good morning, Tony. Jeff Jackson, the Forge fanatic, and my buddy Tony, the old CPP nozzle head up there in South Dakota. Tony, where do you live up there?
Oh, I'm up in, we'll call it the northeast part of the state. I'm about 50 miles south of Aberdeen, 50 miles west of Watertown, and 50 miles north of Huron for the South Dakota initiated.
Yeah, right on. So today we're going to have a conversation about herbicides and alfalfa and timing. And part of the reason I'm bringing this up is because I was just out in my alfalfa field. I live in Northwest Missouri. And so, blessing for me here is number one, I did plant Roundup Ready alfalfa. So, disclaimer, not everyone needs Roundup Ready alfalfa. Not everybody wants Roundup Ready alfalfa. There are customers that don't want Roundup Ready alfalfa. So, we have choices and options. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about would be fall application. Then we'll move into like anything between fall and spring, and then maybe an early spring. I want to talk about controlling some weed pressure in these alfalfa stands. And one of the biggest tools that I love for myself is that I can go out in the next, okay, so I'm going to bale hay hopefully tomorrow. Get that hay removed off of the field. I can see all these little seedlings coming right now. And I have a henbit problem. Round leaf mallow I can see is germinating everywhere. Uh, we get mustards, which would be, I'm going to say, pennycress, shepherd's purse, dandelions, all this weird biennial stuff. Now, I go out there next week before it freezes, and I'm going to make a really good fall application, probably about 50 degrees, 55, 60 degrees in the afternoon, down to the 40s or into the upper 30s at night. And I'm going to clean this field up because when I don't in the spring, the henbit, you'd swear to God that I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan because I will have a purple field in April because the henbit comes and turns purple. And anybody that knows this Missouri area, going south, southern Iowa, down through the valleys, the whole environment just turns purple. So, thoughts or comments about that? Anything I should be doing, watching out for, timing? But I'm going to do a fall application of glyphosate, and then let's move into, I want you to give me some pieces for the guys that don't have Roundup Ready alfalfa, what we can do this fall to clean some things up.
Sure. So I think you did a really good job hitting on the number one question I have for guys when they start talking about herbicides and alfalfa is what's your weed spectrum, right?
Right.
And cheap plug for Roundup Ready alfalfa. Pretty much everything you described, we're going to have really good control with Roundup, right? When we're using our AMS, we're getting the right droplet size, adjuvants, making sure that herbicide's going to work. We don't have that resistance problem. Obviously, there's a lot of documented Roundup resistance out there, but in a lot of these, alfalfa stands, quite a bit of the weed pressure we can still control with that glyphosate application. And I'm very impressed. It's good to know you've been studying up on your weeds so you know just exactly what you're out there to get after. The other comment on that, you mentioned a lot of those biennial, winter annual type things. That's again, that weed identification is really key because if you know the growth habit, you know where the value in timing that application will be. And that's the number one thing with weed control and IPM, right? Like you got to know what you're up against so you can know what your options are.
Oh, the first thing somebody's going to say, and I might even be the guy to say it, uh, dude, if you have a weed problem in your alfalfa stand, you're probably a little bit too thin and you need to have a different field planted. Okay. Side note, if people tell me yes, that they've got a yellow alfalfa field in the spring from dandelions, we'll all go, there's either a fertility issue or your stand's too thin. But that was just a sidebar because I know somebody's going to come back and say that, oh, dude, you control weeds with a thick stand and good fertility and all these other things. Yes, that's very true. But now, the other thing that you made a comment about was glyphosate tolerant weeds. The interesting piece is most of those, I'm going to say Mare's tail might be the exception to the rule because they can be a biennial and starting to fall as a rosette, if I'm not mistaken. But that's probably the only one that I can think of that's going to be a biennial. Everything else is going to be an annual and probably in that amaranth family, mostly. The other thing that I can take out this fall is if for some stupid reason, again, you get farther south, Johnson grass, shattercane, that stupid shit gets started, and glyphosate still works on that, as far as I know. Grasses, all those grasses get cleaned up that might come in. Perennial grasses. The annual grasses we're not going to do anything with this fall, obviously. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think that's a really good point. It's funny, on the home farm here, I've heard it said before, well, you don't want to clean it up too much. That's extra tonnage you can get out of that. But I think we've reached a point now where we really want to push that quality and reducing these weeds now in the fall ahead of next year. I mean, that sets the stage to have that really pure stand of alfalfa, and we can capture a lot more value in that crop.
So I know because I went through South Dakota State University as a weed science person for my master's degree. So let's talk a little bit about metribuzin, dimetric, that kind of residual chemistry, how we can use it this fall and or over the winter, first thing next spring. I really want people to consider that because I think it's probably a very, very good tool. We just kind of we get through fall harvest or we're into doing corn and soybeans or other row crops and we kind of forget that, man, we can really set ourselves up for a good spot next year if we'll use some of these residual herbicides.
Sure. Yeah. Dimetric, it's an interesting herbicide, I guess I'll call it, right? So group 5 chemistry. So it's a photosystem 2 inhibitor. So it's a pretty close cousin to atrazine, right? Which is kind of funny because we think about a lot of times we're worried about when the last time we put a pound of atrazine out there was when we're thinking about establishing a new alfalfa stand. But Dimetric's a little bit different, right? Traditionally, we think about using it as like a pre in the spring before soybeans. But we are able to make an application of it on dormant alfalfa stands. So maybe I'd just throw it back to you, Jeff. Like, how do
Mhm.
I know when my alfalfa stand is definitely dormant?
Well, and I think that's going to take, so Tony, 24 degrees for 4 hours overnight, I think is kind of that magic realm. You're probably going to find different numbers if you go do a Google search and AI is going to pop up and give you probably the average. I don't think 28 degrees does it. 26 degrees is going to be close. I think it's somewhere around 24 degrees for about 4 hours overnight. You should have a dormant alfalfa plant. And they're going to probably still stay a little bit green colored for a while because of the chlorophyll that's in those leaves. But again, I think like anything else, once it freezes, it's going to kind of get a little bit of a wilted look and start turning dark colored. And then those leaves are just going to dry up and you're going to be winter um, dormant at that point. The other thing that I'm going to throw out there is I don't know how much of that stand we will kill per se, but we will absolutely burn whatever is still green. Those leaves, the tissue will come off once you do make that application. If I think that makes pretty good logical sense, but I think the magical rule is 24 degrees about 4 hours.
Okay. Well, that stands to reason, right? And the cool thing about dimetric is it's kind of got two different ways that it works, right? So we're gonna get that burning effect, right? It's a pretty hot product, and as long as we're getting coverage, we're gonna burn anything that's green out there. The other cool thing is it does bring that residual with it. So when we're talking about making that herbicide pass later into the year, as long as that soil's cooled down before below 50 degrees, we're gonna see some of the benefit of that residual carry into the spring. So, couple notes on that. You think about those winter annual mustards and those biennial weeds. That plant's probably not going dormant at the same time as alfalfa. It probably hangs on a little bit longer. So if they're alive and green and we can get out there and we can burn that rosette down really well, That's going to help us with control early in the spring. And then also, since we're making that application when it's cooler out, the residual will carry over and prevent some more germination in the spring. So pretty unique product, but like you said, you want to make sure that your alfalfa is dormant because you can potentially damage it if it's got a lot of life left to it in the fall.
Well, and the other thing that we're going to just talk about briefly, and I mentioned earlier that I cut my hay to take an October cutting. I'm going to bale it hopefully tomorrow. And so I'm not going to have a lot of residue out there. The weeds are going to be very well exposed. I can get my glyphosate to my target. Let's go back to this dimetric comment as well. I think there's going to be a coverage component to this too, because some of you are going to go, dude, I have 14 inches of regrowth out here. There ain't no way in the world that that stuff's going to get where it's supposed to go to do what you're talking about. Hopefully some of this residual stuff can do its effect. And I'm going to throw another grenade out there quickly and say that if I'm not mistaken, at one point I read the label for dimetric and it talked about doing impregnated fertilizer spread and apply that way too. So you could get it on the granules to the ground, get a little moisture, get it to disperse. It's going to do some damage to whatever's out there and keep anything new from germinating. So that's something that, because if I'm not mistaken, there's even one of those between cuttings. If you're doing it impregnated on dry fertilizer, then you're not getting it on the leaf material unless there's a little dust that settles or some dew in the morning that catches some. There's more than one way to get this done, and it's an option. Now, when I say impregnated fertilizer, everybody in the crop protection world or nutrient application companies are going to go, oh my God, man, we quit blending fertilizer and chemical a long time ago. Stop it. It's an option.
It absolutely is. I mean, it's a way to kill two birds with one stone, you know. It's
Fall fertilizer and Metribuse, and I think it's a beautiful deal. Just pull up your panties and get some fertilizer put out there that way. I
absolutely.
tell the crop protection guy at the chem plant, it's you're the customer. You're always right. Just get it done.
My friends in the fertilizer sheds won't like me to say this, but I think I will anyway. Anybody who's putting a nitrogen stabilizer on at their blending facility has the capability to put a herbicide on too. So, let's just keep that in mind, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to overstate the value of getting something like this out there, right? And it might open your eyes if you've never done it before. It's going to be relatively inexpensive. Like that's the other thing with Dimetric as a choice. We can spend a lot of money on weed control and alfalfa when things get bad in the summertime, right? Maybe
Oh,
just a little too much 2,4-DB, or maybe making the third Roundup pass for the year. That gets to be a little bit tough. And similar to our row crop philosophy, right? The layered residual, if we've got that residual out there in the spring, as soon as it warms up, we beat the weeds to the field, and then we have the
yep.
opportunity to lay down another residual. A product like Warrant has a label for post and alfalfa after it's greened up. So if you've got a dimetric residual out there early and you can follow that with something like Warrant, well, then you're already into second cutting, and hopefully that residual has prevented any weeds from being out there to start with.
So I think that layered residuals there is just a fantastic idea. But the whole thing about having a warrant to come back in after your, again, the amaranth species and all those small seeded broadleaves that are causing us problems that do have some resistance or tolerance to glyphosate, that's probably one of our biggest culprits is after that first cut, we take that, we expose that ground to all this beautiful sunlight, get a little moisture, and boom, we get some seedlings started. And now we have those other culprits in the field. So is there anything, Warrant's a great one. How about, is there anything else? What's the rule on these prowl and H2O and a few of those others?
Yeah, so there's a few options. I kind of joke that alfalfa weed management is probably one of the more complex topics, and you're gonna want to be able to read a herbicide label if you dive into this. But Prowl H2O, absolutely great option for a residual product. Some of the other products like the ALS products, a Pursuit, right? We can use in alfalfa. we can get a little bit of crop response with it, but that's
Mhm.
another option. You can use dormant as well if you want to get around
Oh,
that
sure.
crop response. So I mean, there's opportunities for tank mixes out there. Be creative. Not a ton of options. And then I mentioned 2,4-DB earlier. That a lot of times that probably gets used like a rescue treatment when things are gone
Right.
way too far. But I'd encourage people, if you think you're going to have some of that amaranth pressure earlier on, or if you've got some other miscellaneous broadleaves out there, let's get the 2,4-DB on before things are out of control.
I think that's a good point too. Let's stage those weeds a little bit better instead of having an emergency and a situation where we're setting ourselves up for failure. Get it on sooner so you don't have the emergency rescue, even though it feels like a rescue because we're spraying in an alfalfa crop with a 2,4-D compound that's safened. But yeah, 2 foot weeds, guys. When you call and say, "Hey, we've got water hemp that's 2 foot tall. What do we do?" I mean, my answer is always 5,000 pounds of intern or some iron. They say 5,000 pounds of iron, and they go, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, go cut it. It's done. There's no rescue at this point." So that's the other thing. If you scout your alfalfa fields every 28 days with the hay mower, you're going to end up with some of those things. You have to be out there and be diligent and take care of that crop. It's a high risk, high reward, high management. But I think when people push the numbers on what that alfalfa crop value is, you're raising high quality hay, it's a big deal. And for me, being a small square hay bale acreage supplier, I can't have any of that weed in there. And some of these dairies really are fairly particular because you go from field to field and it can change how that ration needs to be balanced based on the weed material that's out there. So they want to keep a fairly consistent, fairly clean um, pile so it stays more consistent. And if anybody knows the dairy world, the $1 million word is consistency. And it could be $1 billion word actually for some respect. But any other thoughts
Absolutely.
on weed control, late fall, winter, early spring?
So I think that what I really want to call out here is, in South Dakota this year, we were wet, right? And it was kind
Mhm.
of the year of the water hemp. And everybody saw that in their corn and their soybeans. So there's this thought process now that everyone's kind of looking for this fall residual. So the Valor, right? Putting that on in the fall before corn or beans for next year. So as long as you got your sprayer out, let's not forget about our alfalfa too, right? This is just the efficiency we can gain and the quality we can gain from a pretty simple, inexpensive thing, right? Once we get to that dormant stage, let's take advantage of it, take a look at it. Because just as much as we fought water hemp and kochia in our row crops this year, I think we're going to see it flare up pretty good, right? A lot of alfalfa fields, we had that pressure this year. So, unique year. Let's stay ahead of it. And while you're out there doing all the good stuff, putting your fall fertilizer on, there's an opportunity to bolster your weed control with that impregnation too.
Fantastic. Well, Tony, thanks for joining me today. It's great to just kind of toss some of this out there, get people thinking, put a strategy together, get some stuff done, because the worst thing we can do is not pay attention right now. And then next, as you said, June, July, we're having some major issues and trying to cut weeds and we know once they've been clipped and we try to come back with a chemical to try to control, it's just no more than antagonism for a weed at that point because they're kind of hardened off and they're twice as tough. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Anything else from South Dakota today? Otherwise, we're going to sign out.
It's cold, windy, but it's always good to talk to my buddy Jeff Jackson.
Hey, the Fords fanatic here. Y'all have a great day. Thanks again.